Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. My name is Marla Billinghurst, and I'll be chairing the meeting this morning. To my left is Mr. Robert Buss, and to my far left is Ms. Cynthia Stevens. The assessor this morning is Ms. Brittany Santucci, and the recording secretary is Ms. Michelle Neepin. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record.
Please state your full name, please. Brittany Santucci. Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give us is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
Mark Newman.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, the first matter we'll be addressing this morning is 243 Main Street. Please proceed.
Thank you. This is file number 19-4122, roll number 12091, 861000. Address is 243 Main Street. This is an office building. It's 4 stories high, and it was built in, there's 2 dates, 1922, and then one was 1925, and we do have an effective year on this building of 1950. The leasable area is 50,590 square feet. If we turn to page 2, I just have some aerial photos of the building. It's located on Main Street. There's an entrance off Wesley Avenue. Just an exterior photo here. I didn't have any interior photos, and I've only been in this building once just for a business assessment change. On page 3, we just have it, there's no subject sale history. And for subject property leases, all of the leases except for one are actually gross. One is a net lease for $11.50. The rest of the leases are gross, and they range from $15 to $24 per square foot. And the newest ones signed after 2015 are all over $20 gross. We turn to page 4. I have the first income stream here. This is for the taxable portion. We do have some exempt portions for this building. For this portion, there is 44,554 square feet. We have an overall rent per square foot of $12.05. We have a vacancy loss of 14%. Again, we have the expenses where we've gone in a different route. The management's removed, so we just have a 2% expense and a shortfall of $7.50, and an overall capitalization rate of 7.8%. for the capitalized value on this income stream of $5,202,000. On page 5, we have a school exempt income stream. This one is $12.84 per square foot, and this is for just the 2,839 square feet. Same parameters. This one has a different capitalization rate at 6.8% for an estimated value of $408,000. On page 6, I have the exempt portion, 3,197 square feet at $12.72 per square foot. This one, again, the same parameters, just a different capitalization rate at the 6.8 and the capitalized value of $455,000. If I turn to page 7, I have my rent comparables. These are our OFD comparables in the downtown and the exchange. They range from $6.75 all the way up to $19.50. There's 50 comparables, and the average is $11.31, and the median's $11. I think all of the comparables, except for one, were built after the subject. Comp 18 was built in 1930. The rest of them vary around early 1900 to 1915-ish. On page 8, I have my just the income value summary of all three income streams combined. We have a combined potential rent of $614,059, and the 14% vacancy loss, 2% expenses, $7.50 shortfall, and for the net operating income of $464,410, and a capitalization rate of 7.66%. So the overall estimated market value is the $6,065,000. And then just the estimated potential rent is net of all expenses to the owner, including the cost of management. On page 10, I have my capitalization, model drive capitalization rates. Page, oh, that was 9, sorry. Page 10 is Municipal Assessment Act excerpts. And on page 11, I have the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. They've reported rent income of $790,976 of gross, with a portion of it only being, I calculated $70,000 approximately for the net rent of $11.50. And then their reported net operating income is $389,917 approximately. So it is, what they've reported is lower than our model derived net operating income. On page 13, I just have the tenant list, and yes, the first from unit number 243 all the way down to 402 are all the gross leases, and then the last one in place, unit 400, is the only net lease. On page 14, they've just put, they've, I guess, removed some things off the net operating income here. They have tenant improvements at about $49,000 and free rent at about $26,000. I'll turn to page 18 is the start of the 2020 Board of Vision addenda information. Page 20, we just have explaining that we have carried things out differently in our 2-year assessment cycle. On page 21, we have capitalization rate evidence. The top 5 properties are the office properties. This is just extra additional evidence. On page 22, we have our non-recoverable expense sampling, just to show that the general 2% non-recoverable expense allowance is appropriate we're using. Our total median for the 29 properties we have here is 1.06%. And on page 23, just that we follow the IAAO standards and fall within the acceptable range. So my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $6,065,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, do you have questions?
I do. So you're indicating on page 1, 50,590 square feet.
Mhm.
And you're aware that you're taking issue with whether that is the leasable area?
Yes.
Page 4 is a listing of your tenants that are taxable.
Mhm.
Page 5 is a listing of a tenant that is school tax exempt. Do you know who that is?
I'm not sure who the school tax one was. I know the exempt portion, I think, was for the city of Winnipeg.
Right. If I suggested to you the page 5 school tax exempt one is the Canadian Breast Cancer Society.
3 or 4.
And I also think there's a transposed number, if you look at the rent roll for the Canadian, if you look at page 13,
The 2,389 square
Right.
feet they have listed.
so this is unit,
304?
unit 304, that's correct, about 5 from the bottom of the rent roll. So I think a number has been transposed there, it appears to me, and I've gone back a couple of rent rolls to check this. So, but having said that, have you gone through the process of trying to determine where our differences in square footage are?
I didn't go through each leasable area.
Okay. When I give my evidence, I will present to the board the assessor's rent roll for the taxable area, which I think will assist in identifying where the discrepancies are. Now, let me ask you this. Let's come back to page 4. Your second item, 2,728 square feet. That's the basement?
We have that listed as, yes, substandard basements.
This is a multi-tenant building.
Yes.
Why are you putting value on the basement space?
I'm unsure why that was there.
'Cause
That's
my
always
underst-
been there, so I'm,
My understanding is that typically, when you have a multi-tenant building, basement space is not part of the calculation. Do you agree?
yes, unless there is some sort of leasable area, which is, I didn't see on the rent roll that there was leasable area to these.
Okay. So that's obviously one of the discrepancies that we're having, and again, I'll circle back to that issue.
Thank you.
So page 5 and page 6, as you noted, the exempt space is receiving a capitalization rate of 6.8%. It's located, these spaces are located in the same building.
Yes.
Why do they get a lower capitalization rate?
They're a different income stream, but that should have been, like if I were to correct that, I did calculate that out because I noticed it was drawing a different one. They should all reflect a 7.8% because they're all a part of the same building. Unfortunately, when it comes to income streams, it pulls from the leasable area, so that's where the error on that is.
So what you're telling us, I think, is that because of the square footage of these areas, the
Yes.
model
Mhm.
gives them a lower capitalization rate.
Yes.
It's a strange model, if I may say. So there are other spaces in the building that are not exempt, that are of smaller square footage. The model doesn't assign a 6.8 to them, but only because these ones are separated because of the exemption. Does a 6.8 get assigned?
Because they have a separate income stream, yes.
Right, okay. But in any event, you're saying they should all be
It should be,
7.8.
yes,
Okay.
an overall, yes.
So you also made reference to the fact that for this cycle, the city has removed the management fee.
Yes.
And as I understand that, the city's theory is that the purpose of the management fee was to allow recovery of a management fee paid to a third-party property manager. Is that right?
Correct.
And it's the city's theory that under net leases, that is recovered by the landlord, and therefore the landlord is not out of pocket.
Yes.
Hence the elimination of that expense. These are gross leases in this building,
Yes.
so there is no recovery of that management fee.
Not that I could see any.
Therefore, should it not be allowed in the case of this property?
I guess my response would be that I would be defending the model on this one, but yes, the NOI would be different due to the fact that they do not recover the management.
Okay. You also, so page 7 is a set of comparables for OFD buildings, and as you've noted, the median rent is $11, the average rent is $11.31, and on this one, for the taxable area, the rent assigned is $12.05 on average. And for the 2,839 square feet on page 5, it's actually $12.84. And for the 3,197 square feet on page 6, it's $12.72.
Yes, for this building, they're higher than that.
And again, it's the model that is reacting to the size of the areas, correct?
The size and then the age of the building will determine.
Then if we go to page 11, which is the questionnaire, you noted that the net operating income is $389,000.
That's what they've reported.
Right.
Yes.
And you've noted that that's less than the model, and in fact, the model-driven NOI for the entirety of the building is found on your page 8,
Yes.
and that's $464,000.
Yes, sir.
So they actually collected $389,000, and to be clear, that's without any vacancy in that year.
That
correct?
would be, yes, the 0% vacancy.
So if a vacancy allowance were given, that 389 would go down.
If we were to put that, yes.
Yes. But the model says after vacancy that the net operating income should be $464,000.
Yes, that's the model.
Okay. And also on page 8, in the summary column, where it has the NOI of $464,000, the capitalization rate is shown as 7.66. That's the blend
Yes.
of the three of them, but you're saying that should be 7.8.
If you use a 7.8 with our model derived net operating income, the value drops to $5,954,000. I think it was only a 1.8% decrease.
$5,954,000?
Yes.
Okay. So whatever else is happening on this property, and there'll be more for us to talk about, you're saying that adjusting the cap rate to 7.8 on everything, that value should be $5,954,000.
Yes.
But we also don't have a 5% management fee here, so do we think that should come in as well?
I think that would have to do partly why our net operating income is higher than what they reported.
Okay. Then also coming back to page 11, and forgive me, just if we can go back to page 8 for a moment. So on this cycle, the city is using the 2% expense allowance.
Yes, sir.
And on page 8, on the summary column, that 2% expense allowance is $10,561.
Yes.
We go to page 11 now. In the middle column of the questionnaire, right at the bottom, line 221, leasing commissions, $21,871. You see that? Okay. If we turn the page, we see the capital cost summary.
Yes.
We see they spent a total of $196,000 on the building, correct? And that's what the 2% in part is intended to cover, correct?
For this, yes.
Yes. So it just so happens on this building, we have a total, if you include the commissions, of about $217,000 of expenditures, and the 2% allowance is just over $10,000. Okay. Then you made reference at page 21 to various capitalization rates.
Yes.
These are not intended to be site-specific.
No, they're just extra evidence
Right.
to provide.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stevens?
I think most of my questions have been answered because they were about the cap rate and the rents, but just to the rent comp, so, given that they are showing to be lower than what the model is spit out, what's the reasoning there, you think, that the model is spitting out a higher rent?
It could be due to the fact of this building having a newer year built and then an effective age.
Newer than the
Higher
other,
rents.
than the comps that are there, I noticed most of them are, yeah,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, I think all my other questions have been answered.
Thank you. Mr. Buss?
So do you have a final value that you said that the cap rate should be changed and that made $5,954,000?
Yes, using
Are
the
there
same.
any other changes that we should be,
Based on the model parameters, that would be the changes.
That's all my questions.
Okay, you had said that you, of course, these, like your page 4, 5, 6, those are all model driven. So, do you have an average rent per square foot for your calculation on page 4?
Yes, it is $12.05. So about $1 higher than our median. And I think
And do you have an average rent per square foot without the basement amount calculated in that?
that makes it higher at $12.63.
Okay. Thank you, those are my questions. Mr. Newman, you're up.
So what I'd like to do is hand out this document. As I told you, I took the assessor's rent roll essentially, just to help identify where the missing and different square footages are.
Okay, so it's not new evidence?
No,
It's
this is the assessor's
okay,
brief. All I've done is.
Made some notes on it.
Right.
Okay? Sure.
So, and let me just start here. So the assessor reports the building as being 50,590 square feet. This page is the assessor's taxable area. What I have done is I have tied each of the tenants to the areas. So, and forgive my handwriting, but it starts with Bell occupying 10,162 square feet. Team, Her Majesty the Queen, Daytona, 400 Management. I've gone through the rent roll and I've tied each and every one of the tenancies. What I'm left with is the circled ones that I can't connect. So we've talked about the basement, 2,728 square feet. I don't understand why this basement space has been valued. In multi-tenant buildings, basement space is never valued, so I don't know why it's being valued. Then there's 800 square feet, 404 square feet, 1,130 square feet. I've seen this before. My best guess is that over the years, the configuration of the building changed internally, and it just never got
Some
updated.
offices just absorbed neighboring
Yep,
offices.
the walls got moved, things happened. So what I see is the assessor has 44,554 square feet. I take off this 2728, I take off the 800, I take off the 404, and I take off the 1130, and that brings me to 39,492 square feet. Then we have the exempt areas, so the 3197 is the City of Winnipeg space. And the 2389, which the assessor has as 2839, because I think there's a transposed number, that's the Canadian Breast Cancer Society. And so at the end of the day, in my mind, we've got leasable area of 45,078 square feet. So I'm just trying to explain where I think the discrepancies are. And you'll see when I get to the end of my presentation, I've actually broken out the square footage areas into I've broken it out as I've just explained it to you, and I've done my workups on the separate areas just as I've explained it to you. So, and I'll show you that as we get to the end. So, more generally now, and this is where I'm going to speak briefly about the 5% issue. By coincidence, it just so happens the first building here is a gross building where, frankly, the assessor's rationale for eliminating the 5% on this cycle was that they believed under net leases the management fee was recoverable, therefore there was no need to allow it as an expense. It just so happens that it's not recoverable in the context of this building, and so in my view there is a need to allow it as an expense, and so that will lead to a 5% adjustment for the reasons, for that reason alone. But I'm also going to give you my brief submission because I know a number of you have heard this already in relation to this issue, and I have my brief in this regard. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip to the tabs, but I want to back up a step. And I want to say generally, let's be very careful to make a distinction between shortfall and non-recoverable expenses. Shortfall is what tenants normally pay when they're there by way of expenses. When they're not there, the landlord is out of pocket, the landlord has a shortfall in terms of recoverable expenses. Therefore, when you allow a vacancy, you allow an equivalent square footage shortfall. I just want to make it clear that that is completely different than a non-recoverable expense, and let's not mix the two. A non-recoverable expense is something the landlord never recovers from a tenant, just because of the nature of the expenses. There's structural repairs, for example, and the city accepts in concept that there are non-recoverable expenses. That's why they allow the 2%. We say 2% is not adequate. By coincidence, again, this building in the questionnaires shows 21,000 plus of commissions. It shows $196,000 of capital expenditures, and we know the 2% based on the assessor's values, or rents rather, is $10,500 odd. And yet they've spent $217,000 in this year, and I'm going to show you a questionnaire from 2016 where they spent another amount on account of capital expenditures. They spent $84,000 in 2016. So over these 2 years, we've got 217 plus 84. We've got $301,000. Plus they spent $15,000 on commission in 2016. We've got $316,000 of expenditures that in the assessor's mind are covered by the 2%. You have heard me say before, these expenses are cyclical. They don't happen year in, year out, and that's why you use an amortized amount. If the assessor's 2% is allowed at just over $10,000, it's going to take 30 years to recover the amounts this landlord has spent in these 2 years. And in fact, I know that in 2018, they spent another six-figure amount. My point simply is that the 2% is not adequate. I know the assessor takes the view that leasing commissions are not an allowable expense. They are the reality of the world for a property owner. They are amounts that must be spent. So, having said all of that to you, let me turn to the submission on non-recoverable expenses. Tab 1 is excerpts from the appraisal of real estate, simply to explain to you that when somebody buys a building, they're buying a future stream of income. That's the principle of anticipation. Tab 2 Also from the appraisal of real estate, it's a discussion about the various types of expenses that can be incurred. If you look to the fifth page in, it's page 21.18 in the upper left-hand corner. There's leasing commissions discussed, so clearly an expense. Tab 3, the Sauder School of Business at University of British Columbia, a very well-known school for real estate matters. The second page in, there's a discussion about leasing and capital costs as a form of non-recoverable expense. The city manual going back to 1994. You've heard me say that although the city calls it a management fee, historically it was not intended to be a true third-party Colliers type of manager's fee. What it was intended to be historically was other forms of non-recoverable expenses. Tab 5, the various manuals the city published over the years which continue that theme. Tab 6, the Saskatchewan Assessing Authority Manual, which also talks about unrecovered expenses at the bottom of what is page 18. They make reference to expenses typically not included in a lease, legal and audit fees. Over onto the next page, structural repairs, advertising and promotion, leasing commissions. And then at page 20, they provide an example, and again, I say to you, it's only an example of the non-recoverable expense at 8%. Tab 7, MPAC, Municipal Property Assessment Corporation of Ontario. This is the assessing authority in Ontario. Page 16 in the lower right-hand corner, again, the concept of non-recoverable operating expenses. On to page 17, figure 3.3, again, just an example, a 5% allowance on account of non-recoverable expenses. And then some decisions, and then a study I have done, which I have addressed with you previously. I'm pretty comfortable every one of you has heard me on this issue in the past. So, and I've got 17 properties here, and when I narrow it down to 7, the range is 4 to 8%. So, there's two things I say to you, and because I'm not going to repeat this in the context of the other properties. My view is generally the 5% should be allowed, and what I have done at tab 2 of my materials is I have put in a sampling of decisions where various panels have allowed.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there when we don't look at other board of revision decisions.
Fine. So, so you should be allowing it generally on all properties for the reasons I've articulated. This property, because of the gross nature of the leases, is unique. And so I think whatever you may think about the 5% issue generally, in this case it needs to be allowed. So having said all of that, let me now come back to my brief, and you'll not hear from me on the 5% issue again. Let me come back to my brief. So we've got the issue of the square footage, and I think now, based on the sheet I've handed out, hopefully that analysis is clear. The rental rates, as we've already discussed, the 2017 questionnaire shows net operating income of $389,000. Following the 2 pages of text, there are some attachments that are numbered in the lower right-hand corner. Let me work through those. So the first page was the calculation of the assessment. The second page is part of the assessment calculation. The third page is the 2016 questionnaire. What I want to point out there, middle column down towards the bottom, net operating income, $397,000. And commissions right below that of $15,171 that I referenced earlier. On the next page, which is page number 4 in the lower right-hand corner, $84,000 of heating, ventilating, and air conditioning expenses incurred in 17, And remember, because I walked through all these expenses, we're able to get to north of $317,000. Then page 7 is the 2017 questionnaire. The assessor's got it in her brief. You've seen in the middle column the $389,000 of net operating income and the $21,000 of commissions. On the next page, page 8, the $196,000 of capital expenditures. A series of Class D building comps that were submitted in the context of 93 Lombard. And then ultimately, my workups in terms of the different income streams. So let's look at the one on the left, which is the taxable office space. What I have done is I have taken the
Sorry,
face,
which page are you on now?
page 12.
Okay, thank you.
So what I have done is left column, or left spreadsheet is the taxable, middle spreadsheet is the city of Winnipeg, right-hand spreadsheet is the school tax exempt. So let's work with the left column, the taxable first, and I'll explain my differences compared to the assessors. First of all, I've got 39,492 square feet, and this sheet that I've handed out explains to you how I get to that 39,492 square feet for the taxable area. Then my rents are derived by taking the gross rents which are in place, and they all appear in brackets, and I've subtracted $7.50 a square foot to arrive at those net rates. And I get $469,000 compared to the assessors, I think she said $12.63 once the basement is taken out. And I'm at $11.87 blended for all of this 39,000 odd space. The vacancy is the market vacancy, the shortfall is the market shortfall, but you can see I put back in what I've called the management fee here of 5%, and again, because these are gross leases. So again, whatever you may think about the 5% issue, in this case, it needs to be allowed. That gets me to an NOI of $333,000 and change, 7.8 cap, and that results in a value for this area of $4,272,000, which compares to the assessor's $5,202,000. And really, the things that are driving it ultimately, obviously, are the net operating income difference, as well the 5%. Those are the things that are driving it. Then the middle column is the city of Winnipeg exempt space, and I've used $11.50 a square foot there. Again, the gross of 19 less the 750. The 5% vacancy is put back in. I've increased the capitalization rate to 7.8%. The assessor acknowledging it should be the same cap rate throughout. So that becomes $333,000 compared to the city's $455,000. And then we've got Canadian breast cancer, same thing, $7.50 off, reflecting the shortfall, but I've used 2,389 square feet, and the assessor's at 2,839. And that results in value of $266,000 compared to the assessor's $407,000. So overall, my value becomes $4,877,000. The assessor has said that if the cap rates were all uniform, her value would be $5,954,000. So at the end of the day, we are give or take $1,050,000 apart. And the reason we are apart is the 5%. That's certainly responsible for a chunk of it. And we're a little bit apart on rents as well, obviously. So, subject to any questions you may have, those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santucci, do you have questions for Mr. Newt?
So your net operating income, for the three streams would be 380,000 approximately, so a bit more closer to what they've reported on the, I think, income expense questionnaire.
Right.
I think that's all my questions.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
Just, and you know, and you may have said this and I may have missed it, when you were talking about the expenses that they have incurred, what kind of things were they, do you know what they were doing?
So, in 2016, they spent $84,000 on the HVAC systems in the building, the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems. And they also spent just over $15,000 in commissions. In 2017, they spent $196,000 in the combination of a repointing of the brick and repairing the exterior together with new exterior lighting.
Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Ms. Webb?
So are you asking us to remove those expenses that you just mentioned? Or are they covered by the 2%?
Well, remove them from where will be my first question, because they're not there anywhere now. They're not part of the expenses of the building.
Maybe remove wasn't the right word, but deduct them from the net income?
No, I'm not asking you to do that. So, I draw your attention to them because they illustrate why the 2% is not an adequate allowance. So
Okay,
it supports my general view about the 5% issue generally. Just by coincidence, in this building, because they're gross leases, the 5% should be given automatically because there is no recovery. And indeed, I should be arguing for higher, frankly, but I'm not.
okay, so the difference between a net lease and a gross lease in terms of the 5%, I'm not completely clear why, when there's a gross lease, why the 5% should automatically come off.
Okay, so I'll explain. So the theory behind a net lease is that the tenant pays what I'm gonna call base rent, so many dollars a square foot. The tenant also pays what's called additional rent, which is that amalgam of all the other expenses associated with the operation of the building. Their proportionate share of property taxes, their proportionate share of all the common area maintenance, the building maintenance, that stuff. They pay all of that. Here, because they're gross leases, there is no recovery of additional rent, and therefore there's no recovery of the 5%. And so that's why in the context of a gross lease, it should be allowed as an expense, because the assessor's models are all built around the concept of net leases and a net rent with all the expenses being recovered. In this case, the assessor's rents are higher than my rents and assume there's a recovery, but in fact there is no recovery.
But by definition, the gross lease is the net lease plus the expenses that you just explained. When a person has a net lease, you pay extra expenses.
Well,
So those together make a gross lease.
I don't think it's quite that simple, but in concept, you're right to some extent that when the parties negotiate that lease at the beginning, the tenant says to the landlord, I want certainty. I want cost certainty. And the landlord is prepared to say, I'll take my chances and give you cost certainty, maybe because they're motivated and they've got vacancy and they need a tenant. For whatever reasons, I'll take my chances, I'll give you cost certainty, and hopefully it'll work out for me over the years. But in the sense of being a true net recovery to the landlord, it's ultimately not, because that expense is left behind. Unless the landlord has been sufficiently clairvoyant to properly understand what the future will bring in all respects.
Okay. A question about the square footage.
Yeah.
Now, you're saying a total of 45,078 square feet,
That's correct.
but on the submissions of the say on page 7, the income and expense, and the other year is the same, the owners are showing 46,733.
Yes. And I have asked about that, because I noted it as well. And I think the owners have been guilty of not properly going back and calculating and adding the square footage in their rent roll. So I don't think it's correct.
So would you think there are other expenses, or others, numbers are not correct either, or just the total leasable area is the one that
Just
is?
the leasable area.
And what was the assessor using?
The assessor was using a total of 50,590 square feet of leasable area.
That's all my questions, thank you.
My question has already been addressed, so thank you very much. Okay. The next matter is 406 Edmonton Street, and I note that this one, with liability taxation, amount of assessed value and classification of property.
Yes, and there was a supplemental assessment sent out, so I'm unsure if that has been appealed.
I don't think it has yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's ended up happening is, because of the change of ownership and change of use, there was a request for an exemption. That process caught up with this appeal. The exemption was granted, I think, about 3 weeks ago or so. And I think the view traditionally has been with the issuance of a supplementary, the roll goes dead. And I'm content to either have it confirmed or just treat it as a nullity because the supplementary granting the exemption has issued.
Okay, what's the process that usually, also from an administrative perspective, sorry?
If they are not withdrawing, just confirm.
Okay, so then do it. Okay. Okay. Is the assessor still read it in there? Okay, can you just click, yes, put it just there, make sure you get the roll number and address and everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is file number 19-1664, roll number 13052, 993600, address is 406 Edmonton Street. And the recommendation would be to confirm what was sent out, the assessed value at the $3,813,000.
Okay. Thank you very much. The next issue is 1309 Portage Avenue.
Thank you. This is file number 19-4112, roll number 13003, 670100, address is 1309 Portage Avenue. This is a two-story office building walk-up. There's a few actual years built, so I don't know if part of it was an addition. We have 1929 and 1970. And then we have an effective year built on the first portion of 1952 and then for 1970. We have a leasable area of 21,462 square feet, and we do have basement area of 7,617 square feet. If you turn to page 2, we have some aerial photos of the property. This property is located at the corner of Portage Avenue and Spruce Street. I have an exterior photo here. I don't have any interior photos, but I have been in this building. It is dated and it is a walk. On page 3, I just have there's no subject sale, recent sales history. And I've gone through the gross leases except for the one, which is located in unit 1317A. That one's a net lease at $6.95. So I've separated out the total gross rent they receive from the net rent they receive. On page 4, I have the income stream here. We have a potential rent of $142,775, and we have the lease wired at $21,462, which gives us an overall rate, rental rate per square foot of $6.65. We have a vacancy loss of 10.5%, expenses at 2%, and shortfall at $8.50. Our overall capitalization rate for this property is 8.4%, and we have an estimated value of $1,263,000. On page 5, I've put together some comparables. The top comparables, here I tried to find, some of these are listed in the downtown, lower net per square foot rental rates. Top ones there, the average is $10.09, median's $10.50. I also found some lower rents located on St. James, Border, and then Henderson and Portage. These are some of the lower ones as well. The average of $8.62 and median of $8.75. At the bottom is my, these are just all the basement comparables we have. Some of these are by levels, so they have a bit higher basement rent, but the average is of $9.09 and the median of $9. If we turn to page 6, it's just the income value summary that I've already gone over. Page 7 is the capitalization rates, model derived. It would fall between the 5.55 and the 9.05. Page 8 is the municipal assessment act excerpts. And on page 9, we have the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So for this property, the rental income they have is 0. I just calculated it out. It's gross $224,325.96 for that there. And we do have their NOI, they've listed here as negative. Using the rent, I've calculated, I came up with an NOI of $38,000 and around $38,000 approximately. They do have parking, but they're not receiving any rental rates for it. If you turn to page 11, these were just the leases in place. I have put them in a chart on page 3. We've already kind of went over those. If we turn to page 14, it's just the start of the 2020 Board of Vision Addenda. Again, I've gone through this. We just have how we've done things a bit differently. Additional cap rate evidence on page 17. And my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $1,263,000. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, do you have questions?
I do. So you've noted you've been in the building and it's quite dated. Okay. Also a walk-up, no elevator. And do we agree that that will create issues in terms of leasability of the second floor because you do not have barrier-free access to the second floor? There is basement space, as you've noted. And if we look at your page 4, the second, third, and fourth tenancies are the basement space, correct?
Yes.
And the model is suggesting rates ranging from $4.41 to $4.84. Have you been into the basement as well?
I have not been in the basement. It was only the maintenance section.
Would you agree with me that this is, I use the phrase, a chopped up building in the sense that there's a lot of very small units?
And like different entrances.
Yes, okay. So certainly from that perspective, it's not a very efficient building. You're nodding no, but.
Yes, it was obviously an older building and probably built to different specs back then.
Right.
Maybe not so great for nowadays.
And you've noted that using the rent roll, you've calculated the revenue as being $224,000 gross.
Yes, and then a portion of that would have been the net, which
So
was set, so I think on page 3 I've separated them.
Yes. So, yes, $208,000 of gross rent, and then taking into account the expenses, you've indicated a net operating income of about $30,000 based on that rent.
From the information they provided, yes.
Did you look back at historical questionnaires and the history of this property in terms of appeal?
I look back to, yes, previous decisions, previous recommendations, previous income and expense questionnaires that confirm their gross rents and they're lower than normal,
Yeah.
lower than last.
So what that review revealed to you is that what I'll call the structure of the building in terms of its leases, gross leases, been in place for a long time.
Yes,
And it also revealed to you that the net operating income is historically
low,
low.
yes.
Okay, so nothing, you're not seeing anything different based on your review of prior years' questionnaires and prior years' appeals?
Similar,
Okay.
yes.
And in fact, all of the comparables that you have on page 5, so the top 2 sections, let me say it differently, the bottom section is basement
It's
space.
just like this, like base, standardized basement comps.
And clearly, the model is selecting a lower rate for the basement space, 441 to 484, than these comps reveal.
Yes,
Similarly, in fact, the entirety of what the model is doing is less than these comps are revealing in terms of rents.
yes.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stevens?
Just on the IME on page 9, you said that they weren't receiving income for parking, but the one income they did seem to put there on the left-hand side was for parking.
Yeah, so I'm unsure, because they've listed it there, but they don't have any rates. And I'm not sure where that parking income has come from, they don't. I meant to say if they don't have any rates. like,
Don't have any
sorry,
rates,
yes, but
okay.
they have put in about $6,000 for parking, I'm just not sure if that's part of leases or.
And so they, so they attached the rent roll on their annual rent, but they didn't actually transcribe it over to the form, right? So you worked that through?
Yes.
Yeah. And the basement space, do you know what it's being used for?
There is tenants
There's
down
tenants,
there.
I just wonder, are they using it to store, for storage, or are they actually?
I think it's just office space, just smaller, they're very small units. Well, 2 of them are 600, 605, or wait, sorry, 600, 1375 and 450, so one of them says it's a salon. I don't,
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
yeah, I was wondering
I've
if they were
unfortunately
actually,
never been
if
in
they
the
were
basement, so.
using it to, oh, maybe we can find that out after, so.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I had, thanks.
Mr. West?
How did you get to the net rents from the gross rents?
So for the net rent, I just took, I calculated on page 3, the only one that was listed as the net, so I just took the leasable area and the monthly rent, and just took the monthly rent times it by 12 to come up with $15,811 approximately. And then for the gross rent, I just, put them all in an Excel spreadsheet, just so I could get that total amount of rent. The 224,000 to kind of put in to my, put back in and kind of determine what the NOI possibly could be. On page 9, since they didn't have the rental income listed.
So the numbers on page, the potential rent, is this from your model-driven rent?
On page 4.
4?
Yes, the potential rent would be the model driven using the overall rental rate of $6.65 per square foot.
And I missed something when I was asking you how you got from the gross rent to the net rent. How did you do that again? How did you get to the net? You figured out a net rent from these gross rents that are
Well,
given?
the one is, so actually unit 1317A is a net rent, it's the only one in the building at $6.95 a square foot.
Okay. So there's no elevator in here, so
No.
does the cap rate take that into account? Is that
I would think,
something that?
based on the condition of the building and the type of building it is, having that higher cap rate of 8.4% reflects kind of what type of building this is.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Mine have been covered, so Mr. Newman, please proceed
So
when you're ready.
just so I'm crystal clear, Mr. Buss, your last question's about page 3 of the assessor's brief. My belief is that only unit 1317A, which is highlighted in yellow, is a net rent.
Yes.
All the other rates per square foot in that column are gross rates. I just want to make sure we're all on the
Yeah,
same page.
I understand that, yes.
Okay. So this building has a long history of appeals. Sometimes we've worked it out, sometimes we've been to the board. This building, called a building, is actually not a single building. It was built in different points in time. And you can actually see, when you look at the assessor's photos, and you look at page 2, you can actually see the roof line in the middle picture. You can see essentially where that red box is in the middle, just above and a little bit to the right of the 1317. That's actually the separation between the two buildings, and if you look at the lower photo, you can see that what looks like a bit of paneling to the left of the adoption sign. That's where the two buildings separate. So it is a bit of a difficult building in terms of its condition. There is no elevator, as you've heard. There is a chunk of space in the basement. Over 11% of the leasable area is in the basement. It has no windows, the basement space, obviously. And, you know, it's got the Knights of Columbus who are down there in the basement. And if you look to my attachments, right before tab 1, right before tab 1 is a page 7, which is my spreadsheet. What I have done here is I have laid out what the net rents are, and I'll show you where that comes from in a moment. But the Knights of Columbus are there, down there essentially at 34 cents a square foot, essentially nothing. St. Charles Soccer, I mean, those are both community organizations. Bluntly, the landlord is happy to put people in the basement and get a little bit of revenue, as opposed to no revenue at all. So if we come back to my attachments to page 3. Page 3 is the rent roll, which the assessor also looked at. It's the rent roll from the 2017 questionnaire, and it's got the handwritten calculations based on the 2017 taxes and CAM being $8.36 a square foot. It provides the calculation of what the net rents are on these various spaces. And you can see that some of them are quite low, some of them are higher. Bluntly, the landlord has taken the view that they need to keep some occupancy in this building, and accordingly, they've been prepared to accept these rents. So at the end of the day, The actual rents in place create a gross potential income of $103,000. The assessor is at $142,000. The actual rents in place create an average rent of $4.86 a square foot. The assessor is at $6.65 a square foot. That's really the difference. Now, I just want to talk about capitalization rate for a moment. I have accepted the capitalization rate, but I want to be crystal clear that I've accepted it on the basis that the rents in place, the assessor's rents, are not being achieved and cannot be achieved in this building. But if I'm going to accept the capitalization rate of 8.4%, the rents need to be reflective of what's actually happening in the building. And so if you look at my page 7, you see of my attachments right before tab 1, you see the 8.4% capitalization rate being utilized. And essentially the difference between the assessor and I at this point is really the gross potential income, with the assessor being at $142,000, $6.65 a square foot, and I'm at $103,000, $4.86 a square foot, and the end result in that difference is a value of $803,000 as I have calculated it, and a value of $1,263,000 as the assessor has calculated. I also use the 5%. You've heard me on that point already, and again here we've got a gross lease structure. Certainly you heard me earlier on the concept that the 5% ought to be allowed. So, subject to your questions, those are my submissions.
Ms. Santucci, do you have questions?
Did you include any rent comparables, or are they all just considered superior to,
They're all superior. This building's impossible to find.
like actual comparables?
Yeah.
Okay, no, I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
So, these incredibly low rents that are here, even some of the space that's not in the basement seems very low compared to what we're seeing anywhere else. So is there, we don't have any interior photos or, the basement space I understand, although even some of that rent seems almost not worth bothering to collect, but what kind of shape are some of the other office space here? I mean, there's no photos to sort of show that this is what all that this could demand.
So I have been in the basement, I've been in the entirety of the building, in the basement as well. The building is just a very dated building. This landlord has adopted the view that they're not investing a lot of money into the building, and it's truly dated. The assessor's been there as well. And, at the end of the day, as I said, our average rent is $4.86, and the assessor's at $6.65. Some of that is the basement, obviously, because the assessor's got rents north of $4 for all the basement space. So that's going to account certainly for a chunk of the difference. But, overall, we probably aren't actually that different in terms of the balance of the space. It's just the very, very dated state of the building.
Okay, that's all I had, thanks.
Mr. Buck?
What is the vacancy now? I think the assessor's probably doing the same, using 10% vacancy.
Yeah, and the rent roll shows there was vacancy of 618 square feet, which is I think is just under 3%.
And there's also think 618 square feet. I think they put an overall of 5 on the mailer for the 2 units they have, unit 204 and 202.
Can you move between the two buildings? It was built at two different times, you said. Can you move inside? Can you move between the?
I believe you can is the answer.
When you went in, you were inside, you didn't come back out to?
And truthfully, Mr. Buss, I was in a number of years ago, and it's been a little while, and maybe the assessor knows whether you can move between the two buildings.
It was my understanding that there was a long hallway when I was in there, but again, I was playing it like 2-3 years ago as well for a business assessment. But from the aerial photo, now that you look at it on page 2, I don't know if that's a line separating the building.
So for the basement, again, you were saying there was some, last time you were there was some tenants actually using the space?
Yes.
Not just dead
No,
storage?
no, there are tenants in the basement, and, but there are, Knights of Columbus is down there, for example, St. Charles Soccer. So a couple of what I'll call community-type organizations probably get quite happy to get really cheap rent.
Yeah. That's all my questions, thank you.
There, you have one rent here that's showing at 4 cents a square foot, is that correct, or was that a typo?
No, it's correct in the sense of it's the net effective.
Oh, okay,
So once you take into, if the monthly rent is $3.15,
okay.
and once you take into account the expenses, that's what it comes out to.
Okay, and then are all of these arm's length
Yes,
tenants?
yes.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you. Perhaps we should take a short break. call the meeting back to order. The next matter on the docket is 550 Berry Street. Please proceed.
This is file number 19-2027, roll number 07021, 198000, address is 550 Berry Street. This is a one-story office building built in 1960. We have a leasable area of 17,300 square feet. If you turn to page 2, I have an aerial photo, just located on Berry Street, off of, I guess you could go off of St. Matthews or Ellis. Then there's just an exterior photo. If you turn to page 3, these are older inspection photos from 2010, just to show some of the basic interior office space. If you turn to page 4, there's no recent sale history, and in regards to subject property leases, Unit 1 is owner occupied at 4,579 square feet, and we have a gross lease on Unit 2 of 12,721 square feet. Monthly, they pay $15,371, and it works out to about $14.50 per square foot gross. If we turn to page 5, I have the income stream for the property. So we have the total leasable area of 17,300, potential rent at $198,985. We have an overall rent per square foot of $11.50. The vacancy loss applied by the model is the 5.5%. We have expenses at 2 and shortfall at 7, an overall capitalization rate of 7.2%. The capitalized value is the $2,467,000. For my rental comparables, I have listed also on page 5. I have 12 comparables. The average is $11.78. The median is 12. I found some located in the St. James industrial area, a couple that are located on Portage Avenue, and one on Century. They range from $10.84 all the way to $12.50. I'd say it's most comparable with the ones on Border, similar sort of one-story industrial office building. On page 6, just the income value summary. Page 7, our model drive capitalization rates, so it will fall between the 5.55 and the 9.05. On page 9 is when we get to the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. They have listed as partially owner occupied. I'm thinking they just made a mistake with the net, unless I read that wrong. It seems that the other page confirms it's gross. We have an average space vacant at 0. We have a net operating income of $47,137. No capital costs, and on page 11, we can just turn to the two tenants in the building. So we have the province of Manitoba. It says that they're, from my understanding, this would be a gross lease. That's what they've had listed off here. They have all the things that are included in rent. And then the owner is the bottom one there, they've checked off the owner occupied. And then on page 13 is the start of my 2024 division addenda information we've already gone through. So my recommendation today for this property is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of $2,467,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Newman, any questions?
Yes, thank you. So page 1 of your brief, built 1960, effective year built 1965, correct?
Yes.
Jumping ahead to page 4, as you've noted, unit number 2, this is the lease with the province of Manitoba, and as you've noted, $14.50 per square foot gross, correct?
That's what my assumption was. They have two conflicting things, but they did check off that everything was included, so that would be my understanding it was gross.
Okay. Then page 5, your calculation, everything there is model driven, correct?
Yes. all model driven.
And then the comparables, you indicated that you felt the most comparable property is 1313 Border, because that's a single-story
It's,
office-type use.
yes. in
Have you
like
been to
industrial.
1313 Border?
I have.
Okay, so that is the long, long building that runs when you are on Route 90 going north. If you stay on Route 90, you keep going, but you can also come off onto Border. And on your right-hand side is this building that is almost the entirety of the block between coming off onto Route 90 until you get to Dublin, built in 1979.
Yes, we were.
Much newer, agreed?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the capitalization rate, let's just look at your chart on page 7. So, obviously not a downtown building.
No.
It makes reference there to suburban A and suburban B. Do you have any sense of what the difference is between an A building and a B building in the suburban world?
Class and size,
Um,
like our quality, sorry.
Yes, quality of amenities. So for example, are you familiar with, there's a building at 1661 Portage, the Canadian Indemnity Building. It's 12 or 14 stories right across from the Viscount Court.
Yes.
You ever been in that building?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so that building is a suburban building, obviously. It's got security in the lobby, correct?
Yes, main entrance.
It's got a large lobby area. I'm gonna suggest to you that's an A-class building.
Yes.
A B-class building will be one that's elevated as well, a multi-story, but it won't have quite the same quality of amenities. Would you agree with that? Okay. So, based on your chart indicates to us that the brokers were saying that CBRE was saying that a suburban B was 7 to 7.5. Cushman was saying 6 3/4 to 7.5. Collier 6.5 to 7 1/4. We agree that this building is not a B-class building, correct? It's less than a B.
I guess in the grand scheme of a multi-tenanted suburban B, I would think, but we are on the higher end of the cap rate, so.
But we agree it's not a B, correct? It's less than a B, based on its age, based on its amenities.
Yes, it could be, fall between one of the industrial office, building cap rates as well.
Right. So, you know, for example, I mean, when you talk about industrial, the 80th percentile on multi-tenant industrial is 7.8. This one is set at 7.2, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the rents, as we've covered, model-driven, and you felt the best comparable was 1313 Border, but as you've acknowledged, 1313 Border will be superior.
It is a newer, building.
Okay. Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Stevens?
My question was going to be around the cap rate. So yeah, you've already acknowledged that it's on the high end there perhaps, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buss.
Do you know why there's an effective age change from 1960 to 1965?
That I'm not sure of. When I looked in the notes, I couldn't see, it was probably changed prior. Sometimes they put effective ages on for permits for work done. I hadn't seen any recent permits.
Would that affect the cap rate if it was just that 1960?
Possibly. I'd have to look in our manual to see what ages and stuff were, but I want to say it might. I can't say with 100% certainty. I can't remember the tiers.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Newton, please proceed when you're ready.
So, again, the 5% issue, but I'll say no more about that. Let's go to my tab 1. So my tab 1 is a collection of cap rate information. Page 1 is actually the 2018, let's ignore that. Page 2 is the present day chart, also in the assessor's brief. I asked the assessor the questions I did about suburban A and suburban B, because if we go, for example, to page 4, page 4 is the CBRE data for Q1 2018, and you can see that they're showing suburban offices ranging from 6.5 to 7 if it's an A, and 7 to 7.5 if it's a B. My view of the world is this is not a B-class suburban office building. What distinguishes types of buildings is the quality of their amenities. Clearly, this is not what I'll call an investment grade building. 1661 Portage, an A-class building, that's investment grade quality. Pension funds are buying that kind of building. A B-class building is 1780 Wellington, so at the corner of Wellington and King Edward, Route 90 heading south, is that complex that has the Hilton Hotel in it. Used to be the Radisson, but the Hilton Hotel in it. And then as you continue east, there's an office building, a 5-story office building. That 5-story office building is an example of a building that bills itself as a B-class building. And again, the difference in the categories is always a progression downward in terms of qualities of amenities in the building. And if you think about the A-class downtown office buildings, big lobbies, security, lots of elevators, high quality in every respect. When you go down to the Bs, the lobbies tend to get a little smaller, not quite as nice. Well, same thing with the A at 1661 Portage. You go down to the B, not quite as nice. This is a 1960 or 65 building. It's essentially 55 to 60 years old. It's a dated building. It's clearly not investment quality. And when the brokers are noting that the range of the B-class buildings is 7 to 7.5, or in the city's chart, up to 7.3 at the 80th percentile, clearly this building is of lesser quality than that. And that's what leads me to suggest to you that ultimately this needs a higher capitalization rate, and really what it needs, in my view, is a capitalization rate of 8% based on its relative quality and condition compared to other buildings and compared to the marketplace in general. So ultimately, that's what I'm asking you to do in terms of the capitalization rate. Now, in terms of the rents, the assessor has got a gross potential income of $198,000 based on an average rate of $11.50. If we go to my brief, right before tab 1, is the rent roll page. Right before that is the workup page. So you can see I've used $9 a square foot for the rents. Have in mind that the occupied space by the province is at $14.50 a square foot gross. The shortfall is $7. So if we took that off the $14.50, we'd be at $7.50. But I also was able to locate some rents very, very nearby, indeed immediately next door almost. So if we go to page 1 of the text of my brief, down at the bottom, you can see that I've got some comparables listed. 534 Barrie is literally immediately next door. A lease done April of 18 at $8 a square foot net. Ironstone Technologies. 530 Barrie, there was an asking rent of $8.95. 675 Barrie, an asking of $9.95. 1111 Ellis. This is the corner of Ellis and Wall. 4,000 square feet at $8.06 a square foot, New Directions, Social Service Agency, and 891 Century. 891 Century is where Bill Knight Flooring, it's that building on Century where Bill Knight Flooring is. 16,000 odd square feet at $8 a square foot. And based on that, I've ultimately selected $9 a square foot. So ultimately what I'm doing, if you go back to my calculation sheet, is I'm $9 a square foot, accepting assessor's vacancy, accepting shortfall, added in the 5%. That creates a net operating income of $130,176. I'm capitalizing at 8%, which yields a value of $1,627,000. I think the assessor's rents at an average of $11.50 a square foot are too high. The 1313 Border Street comparable, in my view, is a far superior comparable to the subject. Those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santucci, question?
Thank you. Do any of your comparable rents, are they more of an industrial building? Do they have warehouse space at all?
I can tell you that 534 Barry, for example, has a small area of, I'll call it workspace as opposed to industrial, because what they do is they process various media items. So it's more of a work area as opposed to an industrial warehouse area.
And then in regards to the capitalization rate, you spoke about the CBR cap rate. So where would this property, you think, fall in best? Because it is higher than some of the stuff listed there.
I don't think it appears.
Doesn't-
I don't think it appears. That's the problem with
Yeah.
what the brokerages report,
Okay.
because frequently they're dealing in higher quality properties,
Mhm.
and so that's what they tend to report. This one wouldn't be on their chart, and that's why I made the point that if they're reporting 7 to 7.5 for Bs, this property is less than a B, and therefore it's gonna come in higher, and I fixed it at 8%.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
So my question was related to the cap as well. So we've been looking at sort of 7.8 here this morning on some other properties. So what, you went to an 8 on this?
Yeah. So for example, we looked at 7.8 on 243 Main. So that's a 4-story office building on Main Street. Wesley is the north street to the boundary. That's a good example. I would suggest in some ways that might well be a better building than this, and yet it gets a 7.8. We're going to come to some others. We're going to come to some others where the rate is bouncing around. But I look at it on the basis that from an investment risk perspective, there's always a progression. And, if the best quality or the A-class office buildings downtown, which are 6 to 6 1/4, the B-class buildings downtown, the big ones are 6 3/4, and then you progress upwards. And I just think 7.2 for a building of this age in this location is too low.
Okay, that's all I have, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Buss.
The tenant says Lake St. Martin,
Yeah.
but I also heard somebody say provincial government.
Right.
Is it
So-
one and the same, or?
Well, so the province is the tenant on the lease, but the occupancy was to the Lake St. Martin band, or First Nation. But ultimately, it's the province on the lease.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Neither do I. Thank you. next matter is 222 Provencher Boulevard. Please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. This is file number 19-3113, roll number 06061, 325000, address 222 Provencher Boulevard. The actual year built of this building is 1939. It's a two-story office building, and we have an effective year built of 1960. The leasable area is 15,338 square feet. If we turn to page 2, I have an aerial photo of the property. It's located on Provencher. To make reference to this, because I know it will come up later, this property only has approximately 12 parking stalls. And as per requirements in the bylaw, they require about 20 parking stalls for this building. And they are using parking at the lot that is just, I'm trying to get my directions here, west of it, at the corner there. That lot has 26 stalls, so, and it is the same ownership. We'll get more into that after. The exterior photo, I don't have any interior photos of this building, and I have not been in this location. There's no subject sale history. In regard to subject property leases, I have listed here, the building is leased out. It's 14,000 square feet leased at $13 a square foot. And then that was actually renewed in November of 2017 for $12.37 a square foot net. If we turn to page 4, I have the income workup. I have here that the rental rate is the $11.32 per square foot. To determine how many parking stalls were required, I took the leasable area and I divided it by 750 square feet, and it's required that one stall per every 750 square feet. The vacancy loss is 5.5%, the expenses is 2%, the shortfall is $7 per square foot. And then the net operating income is $154,890, and we have an overall capitalization rate of 7.2%, for an estimated capitalized value of $2,151,000. For my rental comparables, I have 11 comparables here. I tried to pick office space located in St. Boniface. We have an average of $12.54 and a median of $13. So the rental rate applied to this building, the $11.32, is a bit less than the net per square foot that they are receiving, and it is lower than my comps. Page 5 is the income value summary. Page 6 would be the capitalization rates, model derived. It would fall between the 5.55 and the 9.05. If I turn to page 8, this is the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. We have rental income, it's net. They have included a mortgage payment as an expense. I removed that, and the NOI that they had put in here was about $142,000. So by putting the mortgage payment interest back in, I came up with an NOI of $171,632.49. So it's a bit higher than what we have for our model derived net operating income. On page 10, they just have their income statement here. It doesn't look like they get parking income for the remaining stalls. I'm unsure on how much, or if it would be on the other property in regards to the parking lot next door that they're using. On page 11, I just have the tenant here, the province of Manitoba. It just shows again the net lease, what it was, and then what it was renewed at. If we turn to page 15, it's just my 2024 revision addenda information I've already gone over. So my recommendation today would be to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $2,151,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you. Ms. Mr. Newman, do you have questions?
I do. So let's talk about parking.
Yes.
Somebody here has listened to a parking story recently, you. But I think one or more of the panel members as well. So, the
Regale us with your parking.
the city recognizes that under the bylaw, buildings outside of the downtown area have to have parking. And therefore, the city is prepared in certain circumstances to recognize that requirement and take a separate rule which is used for parking for the property and subtract it from the value of what I'll call the main rule that has the building on it, correct?
Correct.
So in certain cases, that happens.
Yes.
And in our materials, we make reference to a couple of those cases. The city's not doing that in this case, correct?
Yes, it was just based on the fact that there was more stalls needed. Because there's 26 stalls on the other parcel, and there's only 8 of them needed. So we don't normally take it off if there's excess stalls. We would want to somewhat contribute value to the other part of the land, and I'm unsure from like if they're renting those other spots out, if there is a value kind of pertaining to that, so that's kind of my issue on it. Normally it's more cut, I've dealt with ones that are more cut and dry where it's 10 stalls, we take it off. So with this one, it was just a bit different because there was more stalls than needed.
Okay. So, you know that it's the province of Manitoba as the tenant here.
Yes.
And I guess you're not aware of what the requirement under the lease is in terms of making parking available, correct?
No, I didn't
Okay.
have the lease, well,
Okay.
it wasn't in our system. So.
Okay. But in concept, the city does recognize in appropriate circumstances the need to deduct the
Yes.
separate roll parking lot.
Yes.
But you're not doing it here because of uncertainty as to exactly what the arrangement is. Okay? And then capitalization rate, again, similarly, because of the quality of the amenities, this would not be an A or a B class suburban building, correct?
Correct. Be a single tenant, not multi-tenant, from my understanding.
Right. And you've got the square footage at 15,338. It's being reported as 14,000. But at the end of the day, the rent is coming out to quite a similar amount, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
So, I have heard this parking discussion, but it has been on, I guess, a more straightforward
Yeah.
property. So, can you just explain to me again there, if I'm looking on your page 2,
Yes.
so on the parking on the right is the additional spaces?
In the middle picture,
Yes, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, the middle
Mhm.
picture. And so the parking on the left wasn't enough to satisfy the requirements, so then there's this additional space over on the right, is that okay?
Yes.
And all that was required in there was 10 spots to satisfy the requirement?
8.
8,
There's 12
okay.
on the parcel that we're dealing with.
12 here,
Subject,
okay, yeah.
and then they need
They-
8 more.
Okay. Okay. That's all I had, thanks.
Mr. Buss.
So how would you normally do it if it was more, say if it was 20 required? You'd take value off of the property on the right-hand side?
Like if the lot next door, if they needed all of those stalls, we would remove the total land value off the subject that we're dealing with today. And, I know the other part, like the vacant lot is on appeal, and we would confirm then the vacant land value.
So the value on the property on the right wouldn't change, but the value on the subject property would go down? Is that-
Yes.
Okay.
or we would keep the vacant one the same, and then yes, reduce it off the subject here.
But in this case, because it's only has a shortage of 8 properties, you haven't done that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that's all my questions.
Okay, I have no questions. Mr. Newman?
So let me address the issue of parking at the outset. And in my materials, I actually, this issue of parking has arisen in the past. Going back a number of years, there's an office building at 570 Portage, the old Union Center. In the 2016 cycle, the panel in that case actually recommended that the city merge the roles, but the city wasn't prepared to do that because they were separated by a lane. In 2018, the panel subtracted the value of the parking lot, and we just dealt with another one, 709 Portage, where the value of the parking lot was subtracted. And in the last one, 709 Portage, it was under appeal as well, and I, as a condition of the subtraction of the value of the parking lot from the office building, withdrew that appeal, and that's the same thing I would do here. If the panel is prepared to deduct the value of the parking lot, then I will withdraw the parking lot appeal, and its value will remain intact. So having said that, the question that arises is there's the minimum requirements under the bylaw, and that's based on square footage. Then there's the operational needs of the building. I can tell you that in this case, the province, as part of the negotiation of this lease, mandated and requires that this parking lot be available and be dedicated to the property. There are people coming and going, and under the bylaw, you have what I call minimum requirements that the zoning bylaw requires. Frequently, the operational requirements are higher, and it's my view that ultimately the entirety of the value of this parking lot should be subtracted. And so that's that issue. Then let me turn to the question of capitalization rate again. And let me take you to my tab number 2. My tab number 2 contains a little bit more information on building class definitions. And please forgive me for just a moment. I have to plug my meter, so to speak. Thank you. So tab 2 contains information on building definitions. This is from BOMA, and it talks about, and I've got some arrows on the first page, which is number 3 in the lower right-hand corner. Combination of factors including rent, building finishes, system standards and efficiency, building amenities, location accessibility, and market perception are the relative measures that are used. If we turn the page, we can see what they call metropolitan base definitions, Class A, Class B, Class C. And then if we keep going, and this should have been in my prior brief, if you go to page 7, here is 1661 Portage, which I described to you earlier as being a Class A suburban building. You can see what it looks like from the exterior rather. It's got 3 elevators, it's got on-site security, it's got column-free space. If you go to page number 10 in the lower right-hand corner, you can see the lobby area and its size, and it's furnished, for example. So these are examples of an A-class suburban building. The next page, page 11, is an overhead photo of the building that you can see. Then if we go to the next page, we get to page 12, and I was telling you earlier about 1780 Wellington, and which is part of that complex at the corner of Wellington and King Edward, Route 90 heading south. And the extreme left portion of the photo is the office building I was speaking about. The extreme right-hand side of the photo is the Hilton Hotel that I was speaking about. And then if you turn the pages, if you go to page 14, you can see that they are describing themselves as a B-class office building. And again, it's a function of the amenities, it's a function of the areas that are available. And so what we come back to again is the concept of the progression of capitalization rates. In my view, that buildings of this type, they are not A, they are not B. And so when the city says the 80th percentile, for example, on a suburban B is 7.3%, it might be, but this building is not 7.3%. Having said that, I think on Provencher, from a locational perspective, it is superior to the Berry Street property. That's why on Berry Street I went to an 8%. On this one, I have moved to 7.5%, moving it up somewhat from the city's 7.2, but giving it a nod in terms of its location. If we come back to the front of my brief, you've got the text, and I'm just going to work you up to ultimately the attachments. There's an overhead color photo which shows the building and the parking area that is assessed at $472,000, which you can see. Then you've got the actual assessment. Then you have the rent roll at page number 3 showing the renewal. Then you've got the assessment for the parking lot at $472,000 as page 3A. And then you've got my workup immediately before tab 1. So what I've done here is I've used the renewal rent in place, which is $12.36 a square foot. We get to it differently. The city's got a lower rate per square foot, but they've got higher square footage. We are within $600 of each other in terms of the gross potential income, just so the board understands. Getting to it somewhat differently, but that's where we've ended up. I've used the city's vacancy, I've used the city's shortfall, I've added the additional 5%. That gets me to a net operating income of $146,686 compared to the city's $154,890. So we're round numbers $8,000 apart on NOI. And then I've applied a 7.5% capitalization rate, which brings me to $1,955,000 compared to the city's $2,151,000. And then I'm asking you to take the parking lot off from that at $1,483,000. And assuming you do that, I undertake to withdraw the separate parking lot appeal. And Michelle will hold me to this. And I promise to do it in any event. So that is really my submission. I mean, the main difference here ultimately is the cap rate and the 5% and the parking lot. And on the parking lot, I say to you simply, let's not mix operational needs with minimum requirements under a bylaw. I think the assessor is saying if there had been a greater percentage of stalls needed, then the deduction would have been made for the value of the parking lot. And what I'm telling you is under the lease, the stalls are all required and are mandated. Thank you.
Thank you. Santucci, do you have questions?
My question was gonna be, so it does state in the lease that they do need, okay.
Yeah.
I think other than that, our numbers are close besides the cap, so that's all my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Stevens?
Do you know what the province is actually operating out of that?
Which department?
Yeah.
I might have that. Bear with me.
I drive by it all the time, but I have never paid attention.
I think it's family services of some kind, but I apologize, I thought I had it here.
So if that's the case, and then it's like they're wanting parking for people coming to, clients coming to the building then?
Yes.
Okay.
And the people, the employees come
Yeah,
and go
employees
as
as
well.
well, but yeah.
Right.
All right, that's all I have, thank you.
Is that part of the lease anywhere in your brief where the province states that they want, they need all those stalls, that extra lot?
I have confirmed with the property manager whether the parking lot is required, and they have confirmed to me that the parking is included with the rent. That's why you don't see a separate charge, because it's included within the rent. So I asked the question whether the parking lot was required under the lease and included, and I received a positive answer to that.
That's all my questions.
And, okay, and it's a gross lease on this?
No, this is a net lease.
This is not
one.
lease, sorry, okay. Okay, those are my questions, thank you. Just wanted to know if parking included in the lease, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. All right, the next property is 201 Edmonton Street.
This is file number 19-1850, roll number 12093564000, address 201 Edmonton Street. This is a two-story office building located in the downtown. The actual year built is 1960, and we don't have an effective year built on this building. We have a leasable area of 8,800 square feet. If you turn to page 2, I just have a couple aerial photos of the property and just some exterior photos. I don't have any interior photos to provide. So it's just at the corner of Edmonton and St. Mary Avenue. If you turn to page 3, the most recent sale was post-reference, so I removed that. And then we just have older sales from 2003 and 2001. So for the subject property leases, the previous owner had submitted this income and expense questionnaire, so it was missing some information. I unfortunately don't have any monthly rent or to kind of calculate some net or gross rents per square foot. I just have the leasable areas, and if one was owner occupied, and then there was some vacant space and some tenants as of 2017 income expense questionnaire. So if we turn to page 4, I have the workup. It wasn't considered a medical office. So for our potential rent, we have $110,743. Leasable area of 8,800, and we have an overall rent per square foot of $12.58. We do have 100 square feet for basement space. I'm unsure. It was multi-tenanted. I have probably, again, the mailer wasn't super helpful, but that was just, I think, in regards to the fact that the old owner had filled it out. For the vacancy loss for this property, we have 13%, 2% expenses, and $10 per square foot shortfall. We have a net operating income of $82,979, and an overall capitalization rate of 7.8%. Our estimated capitalized value is $1,064,000. On page 5, I have rental comparables. I have 18 comparables here. I had chose medical offices. My average is $13.13, and median is $13. On page 6, just the income value summary. Page 7, we have the capitalization rates, model derived. On page 9 is the start of what was submitted for the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. As you can see on page 10, it does say partially owner occupied. They did check off gross here. They do report a rental income of $98,000 approximately. They have some parking. On page 2, you can see there is approximately, from what they list in the mailer and what they have here, about 4 stalls at the rear of the building, and a monthly rate of $168 per stall. They have listed here the space was 27% vacant, and the net operating income of $7,335.75. We turn to page 13, that is just the tenants listed, and shows the unit 141 was owner occupied with a dentist, and the rest of the space was what would be gross leases. We just don't have monthly rent provided. Page 14 is the start of my agenda that I've already gone over. So my recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $1,064,000. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Mr. Newman, do you have questions?
Yes. So as you've noted, effective age and actual age 1960, so no improvements to change the effective age, correct?
Nothing on this property, no.
Page 3, that's a review of the leases, so just so we don't get confused, what you've done is you've noted that the questionnaire gave you different dates when different spaces were becoming vacant.
Yes.
So effectively, what you've done to some extent is I'll use the word, you've duplicated some of the areas to take into account when they're occupied and when they're vacant.
Yes. So it seems that there was no tenants after December 31st, 2017.
Well, I'm not sure that's right,
Is that?
but we'll come to that. And then your page 4, that's all model generated, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And as you've noted, this building gets a 7.8 cap with a 1960 effective age. Okay. So if we can look at your page 13. So this is the rent roll. And again, just to clarify, so the first item indicates occupied January through December of 2017. The second item references 212 square feet as being occupied January through June. Then 1,638 square feet is being vacant January through June. And then 1,850 square feet as being vacant July through December. But that 1,850 is actually the total of the 212 and the 1,638.
Yes.
So what the person completing the questionnaire is doing is actually giving a very detailed explanation in her own way of what space is vacant when.
Yes.
Okay. And so everything we just talked about is the main floor.
I'm not sure, but yeah, so it shows that units 1, 2, and 3 are all on the main floor, and then unit 4 is on the second floor.
Right. And then we go to the second floor. And what it's indicating is that 4,350 square feet were occupied January to June, and then 2,921 square feet were occupied July through December, and 1,429 square feet were vacant July through December.
Yes.
Okay, and that's the total of the second floor. All right. I think those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stevens?
So the comparables you provided, I understand you're trying to find similar types of offices, but none of these are in downtown, correct?
No.
No, okay. And in terms of the vacancies that were showed, so the vacancy allowance that you've provided here, that's just model driven?
Yes.
Okay, that wasn't, okay. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Mr. Bucks?
And the second floor, on page 13 with the rent roll again, the second floor, that's adding them together again. The 4350 is a total of
Yeah.
2921 plus 1429.
So they did occupy the whole second floor up until June, and then I guess they had decreased their space come July.
And they have limited parking here, but in the downtown area,
It's
they're
not
not required
required,
to
no.
have parking, I see. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Is there an elevator in this building or is it a walk-up?
I have not been in this building, and I would assume it's a walk-up, unless Mr. Meehan.
So the cap rate takes that into account?
It's the higher.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Newman?
Let me tell you, I believe there is an elevator.
Oh, okay.
And if you go to the attachments to my text, so page 1 was the assessor's workup. Page 2 is floor plans of the area. No, just before tab 1.
Oh, floor tab.
Yeah, labeled page 2, but I think it's actually page 4,
Got it.
right? Yeah.
So if you look at the main floor plan, you can see in the lower left-hand corner what I believe to be the elevator.
Ah, thank you.
So, this was at one time a physician's office, or a number of physicians. You can see the multiple rooms along the sides. And those physicians have all retired. You can see the second floor, what's described as Unit 2A and Unit 2B. I actually have a rent roll in place on the next page because it reflects the status of the leases you can see the start date of the leases for Unit 200, March of 2018. And you can see January of 2011 through December of 2019. You can see they were both gross leases. You can see the 816 square feet vacant, and you can see a total of 8,350 square feet leasable, with what the vacancy was as of that date. So what do we do with this building? So we've got the 5% issue again. I'll say no more about that. If you go now to the text of my material, on the second page of the text, I reference the plan attached showing the square footage of 8,350 square feet. I show you some comparable rents in the downtown area. In the range of $11, $12, one a little bit less at 07 Donald. And in the end, I end up using, I take into account the gross rents that are being generated by the doctors for some of the space at $2,000. So if you go, I'm sorry, go to my page 6 of my attachments, my workup. So I'm reflecting the vacancy on the main floor at $12. I'm reflecting the 1,175 square feet occupied by Dr. Gray based on the rent roll from March of 2018 at $2,000 per month gross for that 1,175 square feet. Which comes to $20.42, and then if I take off the shortfall, that would get me to $10.42 a square foot, and that's what I've used. So effectively, I've used the gross rents in place for those 2 occupied spaces. I've taken off the $10 a square foot. That gets me to the $10.42. That gets me to the $11.50. I plug the main floor at $12 on the basis that the main floor space will be a little bit more valuable. I plug the upper floor space at $11, the vacant. That creates a gross potential income of $96,523. That compares with the city's $110,743. So effectively, my average rent is $11.55 per square foot based on my square footage, compared to the city's $12.58 a square foot. So we're about $1 a square foot apart, a little bit more, I guess, on gross potential income. 13% vacancy as the city, the 10 per dollar shortfall, the additional 5%, and then the capitalization rate, I bumped it up slightly from the 7.8 to 8%, and I've done so because, from my perspective, the very dated style of the building and that main floor configuration, I don't know what you leased that main floor space to ultimately in terms of all those very small offices. They may have worked at one time as exam rooms. I'm not sure they work very well anymore. So I bumped the cap rate up slightly to 8%. And that creates a value of $840,521 compared to the city's $1,064,000. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Santucci.
I just had a question about the difference in leasable area. The 8,350 square feet is a bit lower than what they provided in the rent roll to us, and I'm just wondering where the difference is.
The answer is I don't know for sure. I don't know, for example, whether in a multi-tenant building that's got elevator and stairs, the more sophisticated manager of the building who provided the rent roll that reflects the 8,350 would be more carefully be determining what the rentable area is.
Just because you have a very nice floor plan here, and I was just trying to figure out how much space is actually mechanical stair corridor. I've come up with about 1,020 12 square feet off the gross. So, I was just wondering if we are off by a lot, but it seems that we're not too bad. It just seems a lot lower at the 8,350. I think that was my only question in regards to just the gross floor area versus the leasable area.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Stevens?
So your number, the 8350, you provided the floor plans. Is it based on the floor plans? Is it based on the rental roll that the owner gave you?
Both,
Both?
both.
Okay. So on your page 3, okay. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Mr. Buss?
No questions.
I just have one quick question for you. The master rent roll you provided,
Yep.
on your page 3, it says as of April 1st, 2019.
I understand. And the only reason I provided it is because the leases that it reflects date back to,
Prior to.
Prior.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if that 200C was vacant prior to, you know, if that was vacant prior to April 1st, 2018 or not.
my belief is that it was,
Okay.
based on the rent roll that's in the assessor's brief.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Does anyone need a quick break, or are we okay? Sorry?
I'm good, yeah.
Okay, so, 1615 St. Mary's Road.
Thank you. Okay, so this is file number 19-1785, roll number 08005096100. This is 1615 St. Mary's Road. This is a two-story office building built in 1988, effective year built 1988. We have a leasable floor area of 12,005 square feet. If we turn to page 2, have some aerial photos, just showing the building's location at the corner of St. Mary's Road and, I have some exterior photo, just the one there, and I don't have any interior photos. I was in this building maybe 2 or 3 years ago, to confirm some business assessment stuff. But I didn't take photos when I was there. There's a subject property sale history of the dollar, not into consideration. For the subject property leases, we have some net leases in place. I've just summed them up on page 3. The average for the leases in place is $11.95, and the median is $11.38. They range from $10.75 or $10.50 to $15. If we turn to page 4, I have the model-derived income stream. Our rent per square foot for this property is $12.49, so a bit higher than what is actually in place. We have a potential rent of $149,880. We have a vacancy loss of 5.5%, expenses at 2%, and shortfall at $7 per square foot. Our NOI is $100,000. $134,189, and we have an overall capitalization rate of 6.7%. Estimated value of $2,003,000. So I've also submitted some rental comparables. I couldn't find anything on St. Mary's, so I have some located in St. Vital and Pembina and St. Anne's. I have 6 comparables. The average is $11.67, and the median is $12.29. They range from $9 to $13.84. So ours is within the range, but it is higher than the average. On page 5, I have the income value summary. Page 6, the capitalization rates. This would fall between the 5.55 and the 9.05. On page 8, we have the start of the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So comparing what we have in the model versus what they've submitted, they have submitted the base rent of $136,928.57, so we're about $10,000 higher than that. For non-recoverables, they've listed total non-recoverable expenses at $3,387, and our expenses taken off the 2% of $2,883. In regards to the overall, the net operating income that they've supplied to us, they have supplied $142,708.66, which is a bit higher actually than what we have used for the model drive. Page 12 is just the start of all the leases in place, and that goes on to page 15. Currently it says 0 vacant. Page 16 is just the Board of Revision addenda information. For my recommendation today, or I should just state, when I went in the building, it's a nice office building. Average, I wouldn't say it was above average, nice space. My recommendation today is to maintain the 2020 assessed value of the $2,003,000. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Newman, do you have questions?
I do. Page 3.
Yes.
Page 3, you've listed all the leases,
Yes.
and you've noted that the average is $11.95 and the median is $11.38.
Yes.
And you've told us that on page 4, your gross potential income of $149,888 is averages to $12.48 a square foot. And as you've noted, $12.48 is higher than the average or median of your comparables.
Yes.
Let's come back to page 3. The tenants listed there, there are 12 tenants listed. Of those 12 tenants, 8 of them are leases done in either 2016 or 2017, correct?
Yes, it seems the newest ones are in 17, and then the oldest ones are August of 15.
Right, so of the 12 leases, 4 are done in 15, and it looks like 6 are done in 17, and 2 are done in 16.
Yes.
That's a pretty current group of leases, relatively speaking,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And then in terms of capitalization rate, so this one is 6.7%. This is the lowest one we've seen today. Let's come back to page 6, your chart.
Yes.
So you said that it falls between 5.55 and 9.05. It also, again, this based on the information we've seen previously, this is not a Class A or a Class B suburban building, agreed?
This would be a lower B. It is a multi-tenanted main area, elevator, amenities.
So if it's a lower B, which I don't agree with, but if it were, why is it at 6.7 and not at 7.3, for example?
Well, it's at 6.7%, which is higher than the 5.55. It would be just the model drive capitalization rate for this property.
Right. Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
So your rent is, the model rent is higher, but your NOI is actually lower than reported, right? Okay.
I'm thinking we take off vacancy
Yeah.
loss and it's fully occupied.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of the cap, this is a much newer building than what we've seen today, right? 1988, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have, thanks.
Mr. Fuss?
I have a question about the parking.
Yes.
This is suburban property, shouldn't it have, it doesn't show any parking on the front, parking stalls, indoor, outdoor, 0. Should it be required to have one for every 750 square feet? Which would be about 18, maybe there's 18 there, but I don't think so.
It's about possibly 10. I'm unsure, maybe when it was, obviously, like, things change in regards to zoning and bylaws. Possibly when it was built in 1988, there was only a required amount. I know when I went there, I didn't park in the lot, I parked on the street.
You've been in it recently?
Oh, probably 2 years ago for business assessment.
This is a good location, South St. Vital, not too far from St. Vital Mall, I believe.
Just, it'll be south of the mall.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
I have no questions. Mr. Newman?
Just bear with me a moment, I want to try and be able to answer Mr. Buss, your last question, because something is sticking in my memory about something about this building and the parking. So if you can just bear with me a moment. If it will let me, which it doesn't seem to want to. Okay, so,
Mr. Newman?
I'm trying to get you, my
Yeah.
apologies, I'm
Yeah,
trying to
we're
get
not
you.
supposed to be using phones in the hearing.
Okay,
Sorry.
Mr. Buss, I want to answer your question. There's some
Well, I'd ask her, but I'll ask you when
but I'm
the
gonna answer it right
appropriate
now.
time comes.
There's
Yes.
parking at the back.
Okay,
It's underneath the building. That's why it's not visible in the overhead photo, and that's what I wanted to look for, and that's what I've been able to locate. Okay, so, a couple of issues here. Primary issues are the rent and the capitalization rate. There's a good spectrum of leases on this property. There's 12 leases on this property. 8 of them done, 6 of them done in 17, 2 of them done in 16, 5 of them done in 15, and ultimately, they create gross potential income of $142,928. If you go to my materials immediately before tab 1, you've got a page numbered 9 there. And that page numbered 9 is my workup, and it shows the gross potential income of $142,928. I've used the leases in place because I felt that with the number of them and their closeness in time to the reference date, I felt they were indicative of the market. As we've noted, the assessor's comparables actually are below the rate that the model is kicking out. So at the end of the day, I feel that $142,928 is a reasonable number, and in the end, we're $7,000 approximately apart on the gross potential income. The other issue is the 5% again, but the capitalization rate, I don't really understand why this building is getting a 6.7%. I know it's the model doing it, but It's not a Class B because of the amenities. The assessor suggests is maybe it's a low Class B. Well, even if it were, that would get it to 7.3%. The brokers are putting low Class Bs at 7.5. Ultimately, I've used the 7.5% capitalization rate. So really, the 3 points you have to decide are the gross potential income, the 5% issue, and the cap rate. I'm at 7.5, the assessor's at 7.6, and for all the reasons that I've articulated to you earlier in terms of the capitalization rate. Downtown Class B office buildings, the big towers downtown that are Bs are getting 6.75%. I just think from an investment perspective, this is a greater risk property, and therefore I would assign the 7.5%. And subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santucci, do you have questions for Mr. Newman?
Would you agree that on this property though, the 5 and 2% of non-recoverables at $9,454, I guess doesn't quite match what they are stating on their income and expense statement, using both the 5 and 2, be taking more of the NOI?
So I will answer your question with a hypothetical response. In 2017, you're saying that the non-recoverables are less than what is being allowed. What if in 2018, they replace the roof? What if in 2016, they replace the roof? Those things won't appear. And that's my way of saying to you that these things are cyclical and they're intended to take into account the economic life of the building. So the fact that in a single year, it may be less than the allowance, respectfully, I would submit doesn't matter.
Okay. That's all my questions, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Stevens?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Buck?
I have a question regarding the cap rate. I've driven by this building. It seems like a nice looking building. Stone on the front, some angles. The reasonably good quality suburban office building. Would you agree with that?
Yes?
Much better than some of the, earlier we had an office building on Berry Street and stuff like that. This is a little different class than that.
I would agree.
Good location.
Yeah. Visibility, high traffic area. Yeah.
And cap rate supposedly is based a lot on risk, so your risk when you're in a good location and a nice building would be less than.
Yeah. So we set Berry at 8%, for example.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but. Okay, have you been at this, in this?
Yes. Not for a number of years, but it's my practice, every building that I take on, I go there to make sure I understand the building. And that's why when you asked about the parking, and I apologize for.
That was my next question.
I
Where did you park?
apologize for going to the phone, but there was something I could access. I had a recollection that at the back of the building, it's essentially cut out at grade level, and cars can park underneath the building at the rear. And that's why they're able to meet the requirements, I believe, of the bylaw.
That was my question. Where did you park when you went there?
I don't remember, it might have been in the, it wasn't in the back lot, I can tell you that for sure. It may well have been on the street or in the front lot.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
I have no questions. So, thank you very much. And we'll now close this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.